Pois. Talvez. Eu acho que era isto.
Good evening and welcome to another video on the West Yorkshire Bus Transport for Greater Manchester. Pins are in here,
Pois.
so
Há várias.
close that and you're
E o
ready to
bilhete
go.
sai por ali.
So on the top it
Imprimir bilhetes.
arrow there, make sure it's secure.
Ah. Pois.
You can just see there. To get it to the date that we've just changed it to, you have to issue that second time, because if you notice these sections here, that's one of the little these are the little dials off.
Talvez isto.
Well, I thought I'd have a little tidy in the old, and I got it when £100 and George Gibson in 1953, and they used it till into decimal
Pois.
bill. Conductor used to do. Oh, when they was first built, they had pounds, shillings, and pence there, and then it went to decimal.
Esta já.
So he looks on the chart on the C, because as he's going past the fair, basically all they used, the early morning guide,
Eu cheguei a ver
£650
saldo da estação a fazer
select
estes
it there.
bilhetes. A estação terceira.
One rev of that will
Era
give
bem
them
lá
a
que tinha
ticket.
lá. E depois uma cena para
One
meter os
ticket.
bilhetes.
Still prints
Uma
okay
quantidade de
afterwards.
caraças, porque cada
So
bilhete
it
era para
made
cada
21.
estação,
It was
para cada
lucky.
sítio.
If you're interested in that, there's quite a good website, Bob Mockford
São-
Conductor's Museum, and tells you all about things like that. It's quite interesting. Alright, thanks for watching.
Não, o bilhete de comboio era assim. Pois. Isto é a maquinazinha para fazer os bilhetes. E depois há o móvel onde se punham os bilhetes todos. Olha, saiu o bilhete. Ali está. E era mesmo assim. Epá, que eu podia ter uma cena melhor para agarrar, mas não, era mesmo assim. Eu lembro do homem fazer isto. E ele tirava um bilhete, às vezes fabricava ali. Na altura, escrevendo ali as coisas. Às vezes quando não tinha, não sei. Então, ver este vídeo. fazer isto também não é fácil de fazer, não é? Depois experimentar. Não há nada. Em 3D não há nada. Mas isto é esta cena de fazer os bilhetes até é engraçado, porque para jogos de computador de aventura tu precisas de um bilhete para ir para qualquer sítio e ter esta cena. Pode ser para tirar o bilhete ou para dar uma dica ou qualquer coisa, e mesmo o pessoal tentar olhar e ver o que é aquilo. Pronto, isto é fácil de fazer, não é? Agora, então é isto. Mas também preciso do móvel em si.
Been at the shed making some of these log houses that I make for Al up the farm where I work.
Que é estes móveis
And
assim.
there's some I made earlier. Well, I thought I'd have a little tidy up, but I've ended up playing with my old Gibson. It's quite a prized possession, the old
Depois a mesa e depois a cadeira ali atrás.
Gibson.
E eu ele a fazer isso.
I've had it since about 1995, and I got it when
Quando a gente
the company I used to work for on the buses was selling them off for £25 and £100 at Covent Garden Museum. So it's quite a clever bit of kit, this. It was designed by George Gibson in 1953, and they used it till 1995. So they had a fair use out of it. So basically what the Conductor used to do, when they was first built, they had pounds, shillings and pence there, and then it went to decimal, and then it went to alpha. This is an alpha Gibson because it goes by letters. So he looks on the chart on the wall of the bus and sees it's a 50p. So he turns that to C, because C, and each one of those letters has got a counter on it, so it counts how many tickets of them sold, and it also gives a grand total there. He's already set the fair stage, because as he's going past the fair stage he turns these back ones, and then this one is like basically all they used really was the ordinary and the child, and that was the early morning service. I don't know when that was last used. That was a combination fare if they couldn't make it up on, if they say it was 55, it would do it. One of them and 5 of them sort of thing. That was extra. I'm not sure how that one was. There's, yeah, did I say there's 650 parts in this, so it's quite a clever bit of kit. So what they used to do, select it there on the letter, press that, you've already got that set, and then one rev of that would give them a ticket. So see if I can do that without making it wobble. So press that.
Vou inventar qualquer coisa assim. Pronto.
One ticket. Press that. One ticket. Still prints okay after all this time. And
Começar pelo móvel e depois faça a máquina.
yeah, it's quite remarkable really. When I was a kid we used to add these up, the numbers. So at May 21,
Bem,
it
não é
was
nada
lucky.
assim.
If you're interested in
Só
that,
aquela parte dos bilhetes é que tem que ver como é que
there's
vou
quite a
fazer.
good website,
Se fica tudo
Bob
texturas,
Mockford,
né? E onde é que eu vou
Conductor's
arranjar aqueles
Museum.
bilhetes todos?
and tells you all about things like that. It's quite interesting. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye.
Back in the 80s, 70s, and they were sort of carried in little leather pouches. You gave your money to the bus conductor,
Tem uma parte mais
and
fazer
he
assim.
would dispense you out a ticket. Effectively, the roll of tickets, blank tickets, is in here, and this machine counts up the number of tickets. And there you are. So this has taken quite a few pops worth of tickets, if you think of that as pounds, over its years' use. It still works. I bought it from someone in Bristol. But you know, also a little lead seal, so it hasn't been tampered with. And you would, I don't suppose for a minute I'll be able to get it to work, but you press that button down and then turn the handle. There you are. What a noise. Lovely. And out comes the printed ticket. And it's got like a sawtooth edge. On the return journey. Click. And it's punched it. Perfect. Well, actually, it's not a pregnant child. Well, let's not go there again. Anyway, there it is. A set right bus ticket dispenser. What a cool thing. Listen to that lovely noise. Let's just rang that again and take us back down memory lane. There you go. Bing bing. All aboard.
Dois destes.
I was driving lorries beforehand and was away a lot of the night, and I decided that if I was to drive a bus I could go home every night.
Couldn't wait to get on the buses, but the minimum age to go on the buses was 18. So I had to make do with an office job. It was in Euston Road, which isn't far from here. But in the summer I used to look down in the street, see all the conductors hanging off the platform on the bus. Oh, I'd love to do that, but I couldn't because I was still only 16. But on my 18th birthday, I went along to what is called Griffith House on the old Marylebone Road and signed up. The best day of my life, probably.
Because I love driving. Because before I was a bus driver, I was also a driving instructor.
It was a childhood ambition to drive a bus, just so I wanted to try it out. I didn't mean to do it as a living.
I came down to London to live, and I wanted a job fairly quickly. And because I'd worked in buses in Glasgow, I decided to go and see if I could get a bus conductor's job in London, and I did.
My life began the day I started working on the buses, because in Barbados I finished high school and couldn't find a job for 4 years, and that's one of the main reasons that I decided to come here in the cold instead of leaving a nice hot country, come here in the cold to work.
I always wanted to be a mechanic, and unlike some of the drivers you have interviewed with their driving uniforms on, this is my uniform. Engineering, screwdriver in this side, the bits and pieces. I've always been engineering mad all my life.
My dad was, he was a mechanic at what was then the AEC works at Southall. In fact, they built buses. So, if you like, it's sort of in the blood.
My father was a master mechanic and worked on the buses, and my mother worked on the buses as a clippy.
When I was about 8 years old, my father took charge of me. He had to do something with me on a Sunday morning, and he liked to go down the pub. He didn't really want to look after a little boy, and he put me on a bus and gave the conductor on the bus 10 shillings to look after me. So I did a trip to Aldgate and then back to Ladbroke Grove, but I loved it, and that was what started my interest in buses.
Really, as a child, buying, as I used to do, a Rover ticket. In those days it was called a Red Rover, which for a child I think was 3 shillings in the old currency, and it gave you the complete freedom to explore London's bus routes.
2 and 2 halves to the 2.
That's 3, 1 and 8 pennies, 5 pounds.
It was perceived as a very good job. It was perceived with very good conditions, good sick pay, holiday pay, and that was for women as well as men. It had a good pension scheme. That's what people wanted to do, have a bit of security. And when I first started, I felt very secure.
I had to go to Edgware Road to the LT's recruitment centre, and then you had to fill papers in to say that I wanted to be a bus driver. They then interviewed me, gave me a medical, and then paid my fare to go to Chiswick for a driver assessment.
Interestingly enough, in London, they took no notice at all of the fact that I already had experience driving buses. There was a sort of a, oh, this is London, we don't recognise anyone else attitude.
Well, early in the 1950s, after the war, there were a lot of problems trying to recruit staff. So London Transport actually went over to Barbados in the West Indies, and they did interviews over there, and anyone that was willing to come to London, they actually paid their fare and arranged for accommodation for them.
I got off the plane 25 minutes past 9 Friday morning and walked into the airport, and there was a man there to give me a week's wages in my hand before I even see a bus. He gave me keys to a house. I had my own room, my own bed, and these are things that I've never had in my life before. So we were kings from the day we came here.
When I first came to London, it looked gloomy, and kind of cold. I wish, to myself, I said, if I had the money, I would have gone back straight away.
I was born in India, in the Punjab, a village boy. Early in 1958, best job for me in those days was on the buses. And I became a conductor first.
The trainees where I was coming from different parts of the UK. Not so much foreign countries, but Liverpool, Yorkshire, lots of travel in the mines, so you were getting miners coming for jobs to London. People from all over the UK was coming.
It wasn't until the early 70s, about 74, when the first women drivers came onto London Transport.
I knew the first woman to drive a bus. She was a friend of mine, a lady called Jill Viner. So she got into the industry and she became a conductor. She very much wanted to drive buses, and that didn't happen until 1974, which is, I think, quite shocking.
She was telling me that a policeman came up to her and when she was up at Highbury Barn, went into the bus, and he told her to get out the bus, and she says, why? Women don't drive buses. She says, well, I do.
Training was like, goodness me, we were taught by craftsmen, real proper craftsmen that went back to the year dot. Some of the old boys that were just about retiring started on horse buses.
Once I was recruited, we went on a period of training, and you did about 3 or 4 days at Chiswick, which was the main centre of driving and conducting for London Transport. And after that, you went out on the road with another conductor for about a week, and that conductor would then sign you off whether you were okay. You went back to Chiswick for 1 or 2 more days, and then you were back out on the road on your own. You had a conductor bus with 60 or 70 people, and you were thrown into the thick of it. If you were trained as a driver, it took a lot longer, generally about 3 weeks. And later on in 1972, when I became a driver, you were taken out on a trainee bus, generally a bus called the RT.
And the first day I was up there, they said, right, get up and drive it. And I thought, surely you don't want me to drive this on my very first day, but they did. And I did. And I didn't hit nothing.
Started to learn to drive. I came across old school driving instructors, like, you know, had been in the industry so long and thought women shouldn't be driving buses.
When you first started training, they always seemed to pick instructors that were like sergeant majors out of the army, who used to bark their instructions at you.
What they were very keen to tell us is that the big difference between driving a bus and driving a car is you have to be very careful with the brake.
I'm driving a bus full of eggs. So what happens if I brake too quick? I will break the egg. So every passenger in their eyes is an egg.
We also went on the skid pan, the skid patch at Chiswick, and that was very interesting because it was part of London Transport test and it was unique. And you went into the bus and you got into the cab of the bus, and it was all within Chiswick, but it had quite a big area. And there was a big apron which they sprayed water over to make it slippery.
When you got on there, first of all, you're shaking like a leaf, thinking, God, have we really got to do this? And there's the instructor saying, put your foot down, drive it, man, drive it as fast as you can go. And you think, it can't be so. And he would come behind the back of you, and you're driving it. He said, right, leave everything alone. He'd pull the handbrake up and whip the steering into a left-hand skid. And the bus would go and up on 2 wheels and then down again.
And when you get out of the cab after that, a lot of people couldn't stand straight.
And finally you were taken on your test. You were taken out into the West End. My test, I drove from the Albert Hall, through Shepherd's Bush, down through Turnham Green and finished up at Chiswick. He rolled into the garage at Chiswick and he stopped. And then the instructor, would say, come round, talk to the examiner. He would ask you a few questions about the highway code and other instances. And then, if you were lucky, he said, you've passed. And I passed first time, so I was very pleased and very relieved as well.
I failed the first 5 times that I went to Chiswick. The first time I failed is because I was too short. The second time, they told me my arms were too short. Then they took me to the airfield for 5 weeks. Come back and they tell me I was too short again. So I just managed to pass because they want to get rid of the conductors and I didn't want to go. So they wanted to keep me then because I had so many years service. They couldn't get rid of me that easy. So that's how I managed to go up and pass.
And if you passed the test, then you went straight to your garage, you learnt the routes where you went, and you drove in service from the next day.
I would say either any more fares please, or I'd say fares and passes please.
And sometimes you go fares please, and then you walking through and just.
There's another one that I still use, and that is hold very tight please. Ding ding.
I just used to say first please. There was a singing to it, like, try to be happy-go-lucky, not dour or anything like that,
There was, generally speaking, quite a good rapport between bus drivers and conductors in general, and a slight feeling of it's us against the public.
Once you get a regular driver, you become a team. You look out for each other, and you have a bond.
And very often husbands and wives would work as a bus crew together.
One of our sayings were, if the conductor weren't happy with the driver wasn't happy with the conductor, you put them in the act, which means then you got a change of conductor, a change of driver.
There's a specific bell code between the conductor and the driver. 1 ring is to stop, 2 rings is to go, 3 rings is full up, don't serve the next stop unless I ring the bell, and then multiple repeated rings, 5 rings or more. That means stop as soon as it is safe to do so. There's a problem inside the bus.
I stepped off the bus to go to the toilet, which was by the bus stop, and someone had the ingenious idea of ringing the bell twice while I was in the toilet, and the bus sailed off without me. So I had to wait for the bus behind and then catch it up because the driver realised what had happened.
What makes a good conductor? I worked with a lady, and she was the oldest serving conductors on London Transport, and she swore like a trooper, absolutely. But she was one of the most wonderful, gentle people, and knew how to handle the public. In all the years I worked with her, probably about 3 years, she never ever had a problem on the back of the bus. And she could drink a cup of tea. You could go in a cafe and the cup of tea would be red hot, and like that she'd be able to drink it. Iron Nick, as they used to call her.
And at Roehampton, there was an artificial limb hospital. And a person came along and put his artificial limb in the small luggage rack at the back of the bus. We got to Hampstead Broadway. I was just about to ring the bus off. I looked, still an artificial leg there. I'm running after him saying, "You've left your leg behind, you've left your leg behind."
I used to watch children growing up. I used to take them to school every day. I used to see them do their exams, leave school, go to work, because I was on one route for 12 years.
If you was on a 36 bus or any other bus route, that part outside the oval, they would stop, line up behind each other and watch the cricket.
My conductress was what known as a bonus queen, and in those days the more tickets you sold, the more the driver and the conductor both got in bonus at the end of the week?
My conductor thought he'd take a lot of people on so he'd get more bonus. So we pulled into Trafalgar Square, stopped at the bus stop, and he loaded up. We had about 30 or 40 people standing downstairs, and that was an RT that didn't have powered steering. So when he rang the bell and I went to turn the steering wheel, it wouldn't move. It's just rigid. I stood up and pulled with both hands, just couldn't budge it. So I got off and walked around and said, "What's going on?" He said, "I'm after the bonus." So he had to kick them all off, basically.
It was an understanding between driver and conductor. You don't pick drunks up if you can help it. And there's a drunk at a bus stop. Now, just beyond the bus stop is a set of traffic lights. So, as soon as the bus stops, drunk comes out to get hold of the platform. Whereby, by watching the near side mirror, just as he gets his leg up to reach out for the pole, the bus moves. So now he stumbles. Now you keep doing this until the lights turn green so we can leave him behind. And there he is standing in the middle of the road with his hand up as though he's going to get on the bus and his foot up.
Children were actually the worst. Like, you know, they would fight with one another. They would fight with the passengers. Their language was terrible.
No one wanted to pick school children up when they come out. So one day I'm going down the road, and we knew that at the end of the road was a big roundabout, and when you turned off, you went round into Raynham Village and you copped all the schools. And I've come down the road and there's 3 buses going round and round and round the roundabout. And I thought, well, what are they playing at? So I've gone round the roundabout, and I've soon found out why they was going round the roundabout, because they didn't want to pick the school children up, and we did. And as soon as we picked the school children up, they come off the roundabout and followed us.
You think? I remember there was 2 schools, 1 bus stop, and there was a really rough boys' school, and there was some nice girls, gentle girls, you know, that used to congregate at the same stop at Crown Point, and they'd all push and shove, and they knew the bus was coming into land, so to speak, as I call it. And what I'd do is I'd come in at a sort of a fairly rapid descent, and you'd see all the boys rushing to where they thought the bus was going to, where the platform would be. And then just as I'd get there, I'd let the brake off, and I'd just drift to where the platform would land, where all the girls were. And they could all get on, the boys didn't get a look in. And I just loved this little power thing. Very, very sad, aren't I?
In those days, the pensioners, the old age pensioners' bus pass didn't start till 9:30. But pensioners would congregate around bus stops from about 9:15. They would stop the bus, and then they would go, "Am I too early?" And they were therefore known as the twirlies, because they go, "Am I too early?"
And the other thing I've got goes way back to the start of the Routemaster buses, and that is the old Gibson machine. The conductor would carry this on their chest, and believe me, it's quite heavy, and you have to run upstairs and downstairs, and I've done 4 shifts with this on, and it's actually quite a heavy weight, so you can get quite tired.
3, please. 3, please.
To actually operate the machine, you actually press this little lever here, and then you have to, so you press that once, and then you turn that, and then your ticket comes out.
But a lot of the young conductors thought it more fashionable to wear it just with one strap round. They thought they were a Magnificent Seven or something, they were gunslingers.
I mean, I nearly knocked a bloke out once as a conductor because she used to have the big metal machine. And I come running down the stairs and he jumped on in between stops and he was airing up the stairs. My machine hit him on the back of the head.
Well, in those days, there was separate fares for every single journey. So if you were on a long route, there could be a couple of 100 fares you had to know.
I remember what you gone at Westminster, so you pay me 10p. You should get off at the Elephant and Castle, but you didn't. So I would go up to you and say, "Excuse me, how far are you going?" If you said, "I'm going to New Cross," I said, "Well, you have to pay an extra 10 pence. If you say, "I'm not paying," I just walk away and leave you. If I want to fight, I would join the army. That's the way that I look at it.
I would say 99% the life on the bus was good. the 1% where you had the trouble and the assaults. That was a minority.
I ended up with a broken hand and a fractured eye socket.
You had the fumes from the exhaust, like, you know, they were quite bad. And as a bus conductor, you were hanging off the bus, like, you know, getting people on and put people off and helping people on with their buggies and things like that. And in central London, medically, you can't put up with that all the time.
When you pass your test, you get one of those.
If somebody got on my bus and they were standing, in those days standing were allowed, 8 standings, and they could read the papers, they don't have to hold to the thing. I was so smooth, you know, stopping and getting away. My driving, I was one of the best drivers.
I ideally like to do the morning rush hour when all the kids are going to school, when all the business people are dressed up in their suits and they're coming on the buses. And you do get some of the kids who gives you eye contact and say good morning.
Mostly I drove buses through the tunnel, Blackwall Tunnel, 108, 108. There was another 182 that ran to Rothrise Tunnel. They were difficult routes because of the tunnel, because there's narrow tunnel, big lorries, you know, tippers, and there was not enough room, only a few inches in between the two. You have to be very, very accurate.
Nice sunny days when there's not many people about and it's nice and casual and you're running on time and the sun's coming through and you've got your arm on the, well, of course you always had your 2 arms on the driving, you never know who's listening to this, always had your 2 arms, and leaning on the window.
You know, I was very polite to them. You know, if I saw somebody running towards the bus, I slowed down, you know. I kept it standing there so that they could get on. Some drivers didn't bother. Once the bells rang, they just went. I wasn't like that.
In the old days, it was the conductor that got all the chance to talk to the passengers. And as a young male I was then, and you got pretty girls getting on the bus into King's Road, you'd have wanted to at least say hello to them, but you couldn't. The conductor got all that fun doing that, so you were very much isolated at the front. I used to get job satisfaction when I had a full bus, not an empty bus. But you hear a lot of crews saying an empty bus is a happy bus. Some people just didn't like picking up passengers. I don't know why they did the job, really.
The worst thing you could do as a bus driver was what was known as punching someone up, which means that you drive about half a bus stop behind the bus in front. So they do all the work and you don't pick anyone up.
I went driving with the intention of working with my mum as a crew. I never did get to work with her, but it was fun punching her up on the road. She'd be hanging off the back of the bus waving the fist at me, but the driver I was working with, if there was a red car in front, he wouldn't go around it. He'd sit behind and make them do all the work.
Plain practical jokes that you play on passengers. I was driving a 36B and we had our break, and on the way into the garage we found a white stick. So I walked over to the bus like that, all along the side of the bus, and the conductor helped me up into the thing, and when he got back onto the back of the bus, they said, "Is you all right?" Well, he can see as long as he knows where he's going, and nobody got off the bus, and they thought I was blind with his white stick.
In those days, the night buses were predominantly for workers. They weren't for the party scene that we see today, and that's why night buses never ran Saturday night to Sunday morning. They were all basically for the workers at the markets, Covent Garden. But when you came back on the N89s, the workers from Fleet Street had all the first edition papers, which they'd taken, obviously, and so you had your whole bus and like all stuff full of papers. And when you got back to the garage in the morning, about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, you'd put all these papers onto the output for the early crews to have the free paper.
I mean, if you was doing the early run, you'd pick the same people up every day. And, you know, they sit in the same seat. They would have a laugh and a joke, and you know, good crack. Even to the extent that when we was on strike, once we actually sent a couple of drivers out in their cars to pick the cleaners up, just to get them to work early in the morning.
Accidents, if you have an accident, to fill an accident report in is about 4 pages. Or when you go into the safari park, you drive in and all the windows have to be closed, and for no reason whatsoever, a rhinoceros charged the front of the bus and he smashed the headlight and the indicator of this bus. You try and fill that accident report, you know. How did the light broke? You know, and the rhinoceros charged the front of the bus. Witnesses, Mr. Zebra, Mr. Giraffe. As I was saying, that's what I actually put on the accident report.
I think probably the most challenging was getting up in the morning, to be honest. Because if you think about it, you're working 1 week 5 in the morning till 1. The next week, you're working 3 in the afternoon till 1 in the morning. So that means that your body is continually out of synchronization. And so that means you get very tired.
It's a memory that I'll live with me for the rest of my life. And that was one Easter. We was coming back from Romford, and what I didn't realise is there'd been a load of youths in a pub who'd had a few too many and decided to have a fight. I've come over the road and there's an elderly lady standing at the bus stop right on the edge of the curb, and as I've come into the bus stop, there's one group of youths who wanted to get away from the fight already there, but then the others had run across the road, and as they started the fight, they knocked the old lady under my bus rather than over. Now there was 2 types of inspector. There was what they called the road inspector, that controlled the buses at different points, and there was a revenue inspector that used to check that the conductors had issued the correct tickets or the passengers had tickets to travel.
The job I enjoyed the most would have been a garage inspector. That would have been working behind the counter, taking the money off the drivers, making up their wages because they used to get paid in cash. When I was an inspector, I used to control the routes. And I used to have to phone all the inspectors down the route to find out where the buses were and where the delays was, and then they would phone me back, and then I'd phone them and tell them what buses I wanted to curtail. Now it's all on the computer, on the screen.
And when you finished a duty at the end of the day, you would bring the bus into this particular area. There would be a load of cleaners with vacuum machines, and they would clean the bus out first of all, and then they would drive it through the wash.
First of all, you were what they call a general hand 2, where you do any menial task, cleaning buses. And then I progressed on to what they call dock work, where dock work was checking the oils, all the dips. And then from that, I then progressed on to bus mechanic. And then we used to go out to breakdowns, and then basically dock work, maintenance, general maintenance. You name it, it was done in the garage. Trying to meet deadlines, trying to prevent an NBA, which is no bus available. That was challenging enough on its own. Everything was top rate. We designed and built the buses for London, by London. Our buses were exported when we'd finished with them around the world, and people were queuing up to buy them because they knew darn well that our engineering skills were second to none.
The RT is a man's bus. There's no power-assisted steering, and you can select the gears when you want them, not when the bus wants you to have them.
RTs, the early RTs and RTWs never had power steering, power braking, no heating or anything. So when you drove them, you had to keep a long distance from the car in front, because when you braked, you had to keep pumping the brake with your foot to stop. If a car pulled in front of you and took your braking distance, you had to pump even faster.
It's a lot of skill to brake them without getting everyone to bow to one another.
There was only 3 things that could go wrong with an RT, and that was a flat tyre, a flat battery, or an empty tank. Basically, the RT was indestructible. It would just carry on all day long.
I tell you what, if you was coming down a hill and you was doing 30 miles an hour, the steering wheel would be going like that. You really had a job to hold on to it, you know.
We'd put up outside a fish and chip shop, got our fish and chips, and to keep them hot, we used to open the bonnet up and put them on the exhaust, on the top of the right, lay them on top of the engine. And so when you pulled into the garage, your bus felt like a fish and chip shop, but you had a knock dinner.
Anybody who joined back in the 60s or 70s, they would without a doubt say the Route Master was definitely the best bus in the world, yeah, definitely.
It's a lovely, simple bus, and I think one of the tributes to the Route Master is that it was built, the first ones were built in 1956, and they still do the same job that they did then.
It was designed so cleverly that you almost wore it like an extension to your body.
In terms of the Route Master, probably one of the best cabs. Simple controls, not too much fuss, everything was where you wanted it, the indicator was there, so roomy cab, flat floor really to park from one step. So it was your own little office really.
When I was working on a 15s going through Oxford Street, and there's an elderly lady, now can you remember that there's no floor buses them days, and she kept trying to get onto the platform. She says, can't you do something about this, conductor? The conductor, standing on the platform, looked in the shop window and realised that the blind wasn't set correctly on the side of the bus. So therefore he reached up to wind it. The lady thought he'd load a platform for her and got on the bus.
But the biggest problem was that disabled people couldn't travel on them, because on a platform on the old buses you can't get a wheelchair on the back.
The biggest cost to a bus company are its employee wages. So if you can operate a bus with just one person, that's a big saving. And this is why how modern buses started to come about, with the engine at the back, you get on at the front to pay the driver.
Well, I always loved to be a conductor. But when they got rid of conductors, I had no choice but to become a driver.
I thought I wouldn't, but I think I did enjoy the one-person operation more. There's more to do. When you're stuck in traffic and you're in a little cab and there's no communication with anyone else, it's it can be very fatiguing. Initially, I didn't do this out of principle because I thought I was doing 2 persons' work. In the end, it was it seemed like an inevitability.
The very first day being a one-man bus driver, I was in a mess. You had to drive a bus that you'd only been trained on for a couple of hours. Because, I mean, you'd already been a driver for many years, but then you went as a one-man driver, and then suddenly you've got a different sort of bus, and you get that, and then you've got to take on the money, and you've got to deliver the tickets, and you've got to change the blind, and you've got to do everything which you never used to do. The conductor used to do all that.
One of the real problems of the buses that we had was that, particularly the one-person operation buses, was that they were very badly built and they would break down an awful lot.
Instead of getting a conventional screwdriver or whatever, or a pair of pliers or something, a little tiny weeny pair of pliers where we could fix a bus at the side of the road, today you got to take it away.
I actually cried when I was driving the Route Masters because the steerings are quite big and they're really hard. The braking system is very hard as well. The handbrakes, too much pressure. So I cried, and then they took me off of the Route Masters and put me on the nice power assisted little darts.
You can't compare. They're nothing, nothing. I wouldn't call them buses today. They're just boxes on wheels.
I've driven the buses, the Route 28, 31s, 328s, 27s, 10s, 414s, 7s, 23s from Westbourne Park, and I did the 18s.
The 11s is also called the Banana Road. The reason it's called the Banana Road, because 11s always came along in bunches. You'd wait 20 minutes for a bus and then you'd have 5 of them.
You were going through the heart of London, but lovely route, always lots of people, always lots of things to see, lots of things going on, especially like Christmas time. You used to get the Christmas lights. People used to come onto the bus just to come and have a ride down Oxford Street and Regent Street to look at the lights. That was great fun, but yeah, I think the 13 was probably the best route for me.
Yeah, my favourite bus route is the Route 18 because it's a straight road. From one end up at Sudbury down to Euston, it's very straight, uncomplicated.
At the time I started work, London Transport ran not just the familiar buses you see in central London, the red buses, but it ran a network of green buses around London in places like Windsor, the new towns like Stevenage and Harlow. The decision was taken in 1970 that the country bus network should in fact be separated from London Transport.
Well, it would have to be Finchley Bus Garage, which I started with in 1979, and then it was closed in 1994, I believe, if I remember rightly. That was a lovely, happy little garage, but they decided to close it down, smash it and turn it into a home base.
But the lovely thing about that was it was a bit like a family. And after you'd been there a bit, you got to know most of the people that worked there fairly quickly, because there was a canteen, and that's where you met most of the other people. And
London Transport had their own canteens, and they had food which was provided from the Croydon Food Production Centre. London Transport had their own tea bags made, they had their own sausages made, they had their own pies made, and you used to have a special, the breakfast special, from what I remember, was about 17p.
Nice canteen, very cheap. You could get steak, chips and baked beans and a cup of tea for 87 pence in 1978. In a proper cup and saucer.
Buzzing! It was all, honestly, it was always buzzing in Westbourne Park, because let me tell you, there was this thing in Westbourne Park where you have to sit at certain tables and you earn your seniority to sit at the front, and the front were the Route 18 senior drivers. These were the drivers that came in from the Caribbean and Asia in the 60s or the 50s. So they were the seniors. So when you come in, like me, my little self, I come into Westbourne Park, I did not earn my right to sit on the top table.
It's interesting, when I started at Leighton, there was, the garage was very, there was a lot of racism amongst the white drivers, whereas when I moved to Ash Grove, which was in Hackney, I think those sort of white people who hadn't moved out were kind of colourblind, as it were, and so there was a much better mix of people. People seemed to get on better, and as a result of which the trade union was a lot stronger, which meant we had better conditions. We were the highest paid bus drivers in London.
It was a way of life. It's the social part of the garage life was unbelievable.
When I started work, London Transport had a large range of sports and social facilities. They had sports grounds around London for the staff. They had clubs, photographic clubs, even rifle shooting clubs. And I always remember that one because it was under the platforms on the Metropolitan line at Baker Street. And we used to lie there and practice shooting at targets with the noise of the trains going over the top.
I was in the garage football team. We used to play into knockouts with other garages.
I used to support my football team. I would have played if they'd let me, but I wasn't allowed.
For 10.5 years, I was a cricket, snooker, tennis, and fishing secretary. So I had to arrange all these different events.
Each garage had a games room, it's called a games room, which had snooker tables in it. People would play dominoes and sometimes cards. We weren't supposed to play cards, but...
The one area which I did participate in was the Central Road Services Flying Club. Yes, London Transport had its own flying club.
Well, I used to play darts for London Transport, and I won a lot of the cups.
And London Transport had their own camping section, and we used to meet at weekends and go out for the whole weekend, you know, with your wives and families.
The union plays a very important role. When you think that there are 24,500 bus drivers in London, each driver can't go into his garage manager and say, this is what I want, this is what I need changed. The union do that collectively for their membership. When I came onto the buses, it was actually a closed shop, which meant that if you didn't join the union, you didn't have a job.
The structure was that each garage had a branch of what was then called the Transport and General Workers Union, which is now Unite. But there were issues of pay, of hours.
But in London, we couldn't work too much overtime. The union won't allow it. It was, in Glasgow, we could work as much overtime as we wanted. And in London, they won't allow this.
I don't think I worked a year on the buses without there being at least one strike. Very often the strikes were about local matters. Bullying management was a particular thing.
We've had a couple of 1-day up to 3-day strikes in around about the 90s as well, when the buses were being privatised.
For privatisation, it was called London Transport, and the buses and the underground were all controlled by one company. Whereas once privatisation came along, then the underground went separate, and all the bus units went into lots of little companies. So it was all broken down.
Well, when they started privatising, they closed garages, so staff didn't know where they was going. And the independent companies that took the bus routes over only might have an LT contract for 3 years. So at the end of 3 years, there's no guarantee that you had a job.
In a sentence, it was a good job that was ruined by privatisation. The whole purpose of privatisation was to increase our hours, reduce our wages.
But we lost a lot of money, respect, everything, when the buses went private.
With London Transport, everybody had the same rates of pay, same conditions. But you look at the bus companies now, they've got different rates of pay, they've got different conditions. You can work in the same garage, you can work in the same route, and you can have 2, 3, maybe more different rates of pay. The break-up of London Transport meant the sports facilities that we were used to, we no longer had.
And I wrote in a great big nice white card and stuck it on the front of a radiator of an RT, and it said, "The end." And within 4 years I'd gone. I took voluntary redundancy in 1983, and it broke my heart.
When I retired, I was never out of the hospital. My husband reckoned I had a season ticket for a Newham General, because every time he came home I was in the hospital. And I would say a lot of that was down to pollution in central London, living and working in central London since 1974.
I left in 1969 from the buses because, as I said, I met my wife there and we got married and decided that we wanted to start a family, and shift work really wasn't the thing. So I became a milkman after that.
I can't believe how quickly 43 years have passed, and I'm now back to predominantly the hobby, where I can go out and I can think, I wonder where the 74 goes these days. And I don't need a Red Rover ticket anymore because I've got my retired staff pass and my trusty bus map, and off I go again.
Burton's love affair with buses really started with a stagecoach, which progressed into the first horse-drawn omnibuses, complete with open top deck. The first motor buses arrived in the early 1920s, and from then on, manufacturers produced ever more comfortable and luxurious designs. By the 1950s, buses like the RT, with its half cab and conductor, were the standard, moving more and more people around the towns and cities of Britain. The 1970s saw a change to rear-engined buses, such as the Atlantean, and such designs continued into the 80s. The 90s and into the 21st century saw low-floor easy-access buses. This programme looks at the current bus scene, and buses from times gone by, using archive film and preserved vehicles. This is the best of British buses. We start in Keighley, and the annual transport rally is usually held in June, and attracts vehicles of all shapes and sizes. The vehicles date from as early as the 1930s right up to the present day. This Leyland Atlantean is part of the Keighley Bus Museum collection and is seen in a partially restored state. It was new to the West Yorkshire PTE and has bodywork produced locally by Rowe in Leeds. This offside view shows a number of panels removed to enable attention to be given to the framework below, followed ultimately by repanelling. Another Atlantean, but this time rather older, and an open-top variety, is WJY 758. It was latterly used by Viking Tours of York, and was acquired in a semi-derelict state, and is gradually being restored to full running order. The vehicle is an Atlantean PDR model, and when finished, will be used to give heritage tours for the Keighley Bus Museum. The third in this trio of Atlanteans is this late model, new to Blackburn Transport. It was new in 1982, as their fleet number 18. In 1982, the East Lancs body had still retained the flat frontal appearance, but had lost its peak dome, something that was a feature of these buses for many years. A trio of Bradford Corporation double-deckers, a Regent 3, a Regent 5, and an Atlantean. A late-model Bradford PD3 is parked alongside one of the now numerous second-generation double-deckers to enter preservation. This Metrobus is a recent addition to the ranks in preservation and is seen in an acquired condition. An overall view of the site shows the extent of the buses on display. PFN 858 is an AEC Regent 5 with Park Royal full front bodywork. It was new to East Kent Motor Services before passing to Lockheed's and OK Motors. The vehicle was stored at the Sheffield Bus Museum for many years before being sold on to Tony Blackman for continued preservation in December 2003. It has now been superbly restored in Lockheed's livery. For those of you who have a car licence and the desire to drive a bus, £5 is all it would cost to have a go. This new to West Yorkshire PTE fleet line was in use on the day, latterly in service with dense coaches.
There we are. Well, I've just put one in here. This is just a fixing in that.
Or if you prefer something with a little more modern feel to it, you can have a drive in this Leyland Olympian. This rally is now a very well-established event, and each year provides something new for the enthusiast and general public alike. The Sheffield Bus Museum's Leyland PD2 687 is seen here nearing its lengthy restoration at the end of 2003. Much work had already been done, but much more was still to do. Here, the engine sump had been removed to cure an oil leak, and the starter, though removed to get the sump off, had been overhauled due to it failing to engage properly. The cab door had also been removed to gain access to the brake linkage and brake light switch. The restoration was completed by the end of the year, and the repaint carried out by First Group over the Christmas period. Some new tyres had also been fitted. It is seen here about to take a party of enthusiasts on a local tour, though for some reason it displays an incorrect destination. The yard at the Bus Museum is tight at the best of times, today being no exception. The Leyland PD never had power steering, so a shunt is necessary to extract the bus, not made easier by the 40 or so people now on board. Chief Restorer, Gareth Atherton, is our driver for the evening. As the bus awaits for its final passengers, the only surviving electric tram shed in Sheffield is to the left. The standard of the restoration is very high, a tribute to the talents of the museum volunteers, and latterly to the painters at First Group in Rotherham. Many of the mechanical parts were missing and did prove very difficult to find in a few cases. There's always something to do though. That annoying rattle on the flexible exhaust has to be high on the agenda. The interior here is not yet finished, due to waiting for cushion seats to be returned from the upholsterers at the time of filming. As the bus heads up Sheffield Road towards Rotherham, it is noticeable that this PD2 is rather more sprightly than would be expected. The upper saloon is almost full, the first time the bus has carried such a load in 36 years. For a vehicle that is 50 years old, the cab layout is pleasant and functional, although the steering can be very heavy. The bus has passed through Canclow, Rotherham, and is about to turn into Wiston as it heads back through Rotherham. The lighting on most buses of this age is tungsten, giving the bus a period glow in the failing light. The headlights are halogen, a sensible conversion in modern times. After a brief stop for photos, the bus has a rather arduous climb ahead, heading into Rotherham but bypassing the town centre. The bus is fitted with a Leyland 600 engine, mated to a 4-speed manual gearbox. The first 2 gears are crash, and the top 2 are synchro mesh. Just about to pass on the south side of the Tinsley Viaduct. And arriving back at the museum. Displaying the appropriate Route 69 to Sheffield. This bus would have spent a lot of its working life on the route from Rotherham to Sheffield. After 36 years of inactivity, it's fitting that this bus is now restored to its former glory. The Scottish Vintage Bus Museum at Lathamond hosts its annual open weekend in August. The event has steadily grown to be one of very large proportions, with vehicles from all over Scotland and the north of England. This is a Guy Arab, formerly of the McGill's fleet. Here, this Lothian Leyland PD3 with Alexander bodywork is being followed by an early Atlantean from the same fleet dating from 1966. Vehicles from as far afield as Leyland and Sheffield can be seen here. This is a Daimler CVD6 built in 1950 and fitted with a double-deck Massey body. It was delivered new to A1 service. The engine is a Daimler CVD6, six-cylinder diesel unit of 8.6 litre capacity. It was first licensed on the 30th of October 1950 as a single-decker, and then from the 20th of March 1958 as a double-decker. Yorkshire Traction subsidiary Strathtay have sent one of their new Volvo B7s to the event. This northern Scottish Leyland Leopard was in use on the internal free bus service. Travelling over 100 miles to the event is this AEC Region 3 from Tyne and Wear. Lothian operate a dedicated airport service using new Dennis Tridents with Plaxton President bodywork.
Lunch. Started.